This is Northpod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Northpod. Another loss this week. Nothing, as much as things change, they stay the same. But not a heartbreaker this time at least. We went down relatively comfortably in the end to the Western Bulldogs, so we'll talk all about this week. I mean, I think it's probably a good place to start. How good is having a roof over a stadium? That's got to make a good 5,000 to 10,000 difference in the crowd, I would have thought. It was such a cold, wet day, and I know there's some purists that love the MCG, but the fact that we were able to go and sit in a wind-protected, dry stadium and watch some very average football, I think it was much better than having to go to the G like some people did last week against Melbourne. So there's my 30 seconds promotion for Marvel Stadium. I know that some people will think it's a little bit bland, a little bit dry, a little bit without personality, but I really appreciate being weather protected, and it did make, I can't imagine how bad that game of football would have been if there was also wind and weather to contend with in terms of rain, because it was pretty poor skill-wise as it was. Anyway, let's jump into it. Regular podcast, plenty of 5 stars, some positives, some negatives, bit of a look ahead to next week, so let's get on with it. Team selection is where we like to start, and not a lot of changes to discuss this week. Callan Dawson came in after his suspension, and unfortunately Georgie Wardlaw got concussed at training on Thursday, I think it was. So he will miss, well, he missed this game, and he will also miss next week against the Gold Coast due to the concussion protocol. So he was out, unfortunately. Dylan Stephens remained the sub after he came on and found plenty of the ball last week as the sub. And that's really it. I think it made sense for us to go a little taller with Callan in and Wardlaw out, given how tall the Bulldogs are. They've got a 3-pronged forward line. They've got some tools behind the ball as well. It made sense. So you would think if Wardlaw was fit, then Callan Dawson's probably still coming in for a smaller type player, maybe someone like Dylan Stephens, for example. And yeah, that's how he went in. The other noteworthy thing, I guess, was that it was LDU's 100th game. So well done to LDU. It does feel like he's been around a long time, and it kind of makes you appreciate, probably he's only been as good as he's been the last year and a half, 2 years. So it does take 60 or 70 games for players to find the kind of form, if they're going to find the kind of form that LDU has. So 100 up for LDU is fantastic. We mostly went in unchanged, and given that we played relatively well last week, I think that made sense. Match result, North Melbourne 9-6-60, lost the Dogs 11-11-77, so a 17-point loss. And at one stage, it did look like it could have been a 30 or 40-point loss. The margin did get, I think, to 38 points at one point in the third quarter. Fortunately, we were able to drag it back to 17, make it a little bit more respectful. However, I would say, though, that the Dogs were pretty inaccurate. They hit the post a couple of times. They definitely could have and should have been further in front. They had way more of the ball than we did, and certainly way more of the territory than we did. So whilst it ended up being 17 points and there was a glimmer of hope in the last quarter, for the most part, through quarters 2 and 3 and the first part of the last quarter, the Dogs didn't really look like losing at all, and it looked like it probably should have been a bigger margin to them, but 17 points I think works for us. Winning would work a lot better, but I do think 17 points is a nice reflection on us. It's probably a little bit favourable. Let's jump into story of the game, and I think if you were watching this game, I think it would be hard to refute that we were just beaten at the source. We were unable to move the ball forward with any speed or effectiveness. And whilst we did end up just winning the contested possession battle by 7, it was the effectiveness of our possessions there. We weren't able to get clean disposal from contested situations, whereas the Dogs were able to use their fast hands to do so. We lost the clearances 28-40, and that was mostly around the ground. We only lost the centre clearances by a couple, but same story that's been at times during the year. A lot of those clearances that we won were quick kicks that were, mostly sideways rather than forward. They were chaos balls. They weren't balls that we were able to, move forward with any kind of structure. So often that resulted in the ball heading straight back over our heads after a clearance. We lost the inside 50s 42-57, and it felt like it should have been worse than that. I suppose probably late when we kicked a couple of late goals, the inside 50 count would have slightly evened up. But, watching the game, I was sitting in my preferred position behind the goals, and when North Melbourne was kicking towards us, it felt like the ball spent very little time in clear view. So the territory battle, I didn't have the stat. I couldn't find the stat. Didn't look for it. Whatever you want to say. If we looked at time spent in back half versus forward half, it would have been a lot more swayed towards the Dogs, because the ball just spent a lot of time floating around 70 or 80 metres out from the Dogs' goal and going backwards and forwards between that point. It lived in our back half for large periods of the game. And me and my friends, it's come up, it would have happened a long time ago, but there was a game that Matthew Richardson was doing special comments for, where he made the comment that sometimes it's just good for, even if the opposition kicks a goal, the ball goes back into the middle and you get to reset. And we've always kind of made fun of him and, had a laugh about that, because, it doesn't make sense. I get what he's saying. You can reset the ground, but I'm not sure that conceding a goal is really what you want to have to happen to in order to make that work. And watching this game, there was part of me that, I was starting to head towards Richo's line of thinking, because the best that we looked was when it was a reset and it was in the middle of the ground and we were able to at least potentially win a rubbish clearance and then try and make something of it. Because of our inability to either transition the ball or to be effective when we did transition it, that was the best that we looked. So whilst I'm still not sure I agree with Richo that that's something that you should be hoping for during a game, I could see some of the logic to it, because once the ball got to that, just outside the Bulldogs 50 and they were kind of putting it in and then we were pushing it back out and it was just flip-flopping that direction, it was really hard to break that cycle. So, look, maybe Richo was onto something all of those years ago, and I don't know if he said it more recently than that, but it would have been at least 10 years ago, I think, that he made that comment. And my friends and I have often referred to it. We'll talk a little bit more about the inside and the outside ball later on, but for me, sure, we did end up winning the contested possessions, but a lot of those, you have to remember that's possessions, that's having the ball in tight and not necessarily effectively disposing of it. So it was the big part of the game was the way that the Dogs were able to set up around those positions, and we'll talk more about that in the negatives, I guess. So let's jump over to the 5 stars and have a little chat. This felt a bit more natural. We've had a couple of weeks where I've really struggled to fit everyone in, and I think this is back to what it's been for most of the year, where there's a couple that I'm like, yep, they're definitely in, and then, some fringe that it's kind of hard to sort out amongst themselves. I definitely think our best on ground was Tristan Xerri. 20 disposals, 5 marks, 3 of them contested, which we know has been an issue for him. So the fact that he was able to clunk 3 contested marks is fantastic. 6 tackles, 34 hit-outs, 8 of them to advantage, kicked a goal, 4 clearances, 4 spoils. He monstered Tim English. He was probably the one thing or one area of the ground that we absolutely were the clear winners, was the ruck battle. Unfortunately, that didn't translate to, clearance wins necessarily or a midfield win, but I certainly think that Tristan did everything that he could. He was strong, he tackled hard, he didn't have any of those brain fades that he sometimes will have in a game, which, is the curse of being a ruckman. I just thought, it was one of his better games for the year. Like I mentioned before, the fact that he was able to clunk it 5 times and 3 of them are contested. Now, look, 5 marks for a ruckman is not something that you go, wow, we have found the best ruckman in the competition. But we know that that's an area that he's struggled with. So the fact that he was able to take 3 contested marks, and one of those was inside 50 where he went back and kicked the goal, that is one of the things that's going to push him, to be a better ruckman and in the top, handful in the competition. It was just so impressive to watch him toil away. We know that he is a great pressure ruckman and he does get involved once the ball hits the deck. And I thought, he was fantastic against Tim English, who, whilst he is probably a different type of ruckman, he's not that massive, strong, bullocking type like Xerri is. I do think that Tristan was able to nullify his impact around the ground and certainly won the ruck battle. So 4 votes to Tristan Xerri. He was fantastic and just continues his wonderful form this year. And I can't be more pleased for him. There was so many doubting him, and I put myself in the camp that I thought there was potential, but I really needed to see him get fit and get an opportunity, and he has taken his opportunity with both hands this year. So another fantastic game from Xerri. We move to another player who's had some injury concerns and some doubts over his career as a result, and that's Charlie Comben. 3 votes for him. 21 disposals for Chom, 7 marks, 2 contested, 12 intercepts, 7 spoils, and he spent the entire time on the ground. And he was fantastic. Like I mentioned earlier, the Dogs have a really, really tall forward line. They've got Ugle Hayden down there, Darcy down there, Aaron Norton down there. Rory Lobb is sometimes down there, but he seemed to spend most of his time either backup rucking or in defence / on the wing. So they didn't go with the 4 talls at any one time, but regardless, our tall defenders had their hands full, and Chom was fantastic. I think probably for me his best balanced game in that, again, he didn't really have the mistakes that we've seen sometimes creep into his game when he's under pressure. I thought he had some fantastic quick hands at the back of contests. His 12 intercepts was most on the ground, and I think it wasn't just intercepts in that they were poor kicks that ended up going to him. He was finding himself in the right spot and making the right reads to either go for a mark or to spoil from behind. He was fantastic. We know that in the past he's also had some issues with biting off some kicks that maybe aren't in his skill set, and I don't think he did that. He was either giving off the hands or he was kicking long down the line, which you could argue our team did too much of in this game, but I think if Charlie Comben's got it in his hands 30 or 40 metres out from the opposition goal, I think that's generally the right move unless there's someone absolutely free. That's where he's at the moment. So, yeah, he was our best tall defender. I think he was our best defender overall. Most consistent across the game and just, had some fantastic highlights. The 2 contested marks were, I guess, emblematic of the sort of player that we're hoping that he is becoming down back. There's some real Robbie Tarrant vibes about the way that he's playing. He's certainly got a bit more weight to put on his upper half if he's going to end up like Rob. But, a fantastic game from Chom, and just fantastic to see him in the votes again because, there was a period there over the last couple of years where it looked like maybe his body was going to fail him, but this move down back has done wonders for him. So, I mean, that's one of the moves that I guess we've got to look at Clarko and go, you've made a fantastic call. Who knows what the long term looks like, but for right now, it's hard to see Chom moving out of that key defensive post. Then it got a little bit harder because I don't think any of the other 21 players were absolute shoo-ins for votes, but I think the next 2, it's hard to argue with. You could definitely argue with their order, but I've gone with 2 votes to Zurhaar. 15 disposals, 2 goals, 1, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 4 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, and whilst he floated in and out of the game, I think that is reflective of the amount of ball that was headed his direction into the north forward line. I thought Cam was at his opportunistic best. He was there to crumb when he needed to. He took a couple of marks and just took advantage of the opportunities that came his way. Like I said, 2 goals and 7 score involvements, so he was often finishing it or he was involved in the chains that were leading to scores, and that was something that we really struggled with in this game, is someone in the forward half that could turn the odd possession into a score, because there was a lot of balls that ended up not quite hitting the target forward of centre and making life hard for our forwards and the mids running through. And I thought Cam was probably the cleanest holistically. Certainly wasn't a perfect game for him. He made a couple of mistakes, but yeah, I thought overall, considering the amount of ball that came his way, he did a great job. His 2 tackles were both inside 50, which, creates repeat stoppage or free kick, depending on how you go. So I thought his pressure, particularly at the start of the game, was fantastic. As the game opened up a little bit and the ball didn't spend as much time in our forward line, things did change, but yeah, I thought he was probably our most consistent forward across the day. And yeah, like I said, if he had more ball, I think it's a different story. He probably has a game where he kicks 4 or 5, but the ball just wasn't coming in at the right volume or in the right way for him to have one of those nights, or one of those days rather. And then 1 vote, Harry Sheezel. Like I said, you could definitely swap Sheezel and Zurhaar around. Sheezel had 27 disposals, kicked a goal, 5 marks, 5 clearances, 6 score involvements, so just the one less than Zurhaar, and 26 pressure acts. He led the team for pressure, and I thought he was our best midfielder. That being said, he didn't spend or didn't start in the midfield as much as some of our other mids. Certainly LDU and Wilfield and Jai Simpkin were getting the most time in that, centre bounce attendance area. And Tommy Power went through there as well. Sheezel was that sort of half forward or half back that pushed up and was the extra midfielder essentially. And I thought around the ball he was fantastic. I think he had his equal career most contested possessions, 12 or so. And yeah, was just a consistent contributor. We know exactly what we're going to get from Sheezel around the ball. He's clean. He's got quick hands. He generally makes good decisions, and I thought he did that across most of the game. His goal was a fantastic, really quick snap. I can't remember if it was a handball. I think it might have been a handball from Eddie Ford, maybe. Anyway, he certainly received the ball very quickly and put it on his boot and snapped it really cleanly. That was in the first quarter. You can tell he's someone that's spent some time around the goals because he has those instincts to get it in the right area when he throws it quickly on his boot. So yeah, he was absolutely fantastic. Probably not one of his best games for the year, just because we were beaten around the midfield and he didn't necessarily have those chains involving several other midfielders where they're running through the middle of the ground and giving it to each other and then cleanly disposing of it inside 50. He didn't necessarily have those, but I thought he did the best with what he could around him. And like I said, probably our best player that went through the midfield that wasn't named, Tristan Xerri. So 4 votes Xerri, 3 to Comben, 2 to Zurhaar, and 1 to Sheezel. In terms of unlucky players, I think Darcy Tucker really accumulated. He had a really good game by his standards, had 30 disposals, so was our highest possession getter. He did spend a lot of time behind the ball in the Zach Fisher role in the last quarter when Zach went off. And in general, just found himself in good positions. Did a couple of really nice things, but yeah, I just don't think he did enough offensively to warrant getting votes. A lot of his kicks were just Charlie Comben kicks, essentially, and Darcy Tucker should be able to kick it better than that. He should be able to hit a target 35 metres away that's in a dangerous position, but most of his kicks seem to be long down the line in that Luke McDonald role as well. So yeah, he had a good game, but not quite good enough for me to get in the votes. I thought Eddie Ford he had a nearly game. He had some fantastic score involvement and goal assists. I think that's one of the best parts of his game, is his capacity to win the ball and then give it off quickly to someone in a better position. He did that a couple of times. Took some fantastic marks. Nearly took mark of the year. So he was really feeling it at one point. He was just a little bit wasteful. Kicked 1 goal too, and his goal was from a 50-metre penalty. And yeah, he had an opportunity late where, to me, he just took a little bit too long to kick a point. I understand that you want to get it right, and unfortunately he didn't. But there was so little time left on the clock, and he just seemed to take a little bit longer than he needed to. Missed another gettable shot. So yeah, it was just a little bit wasteful for me. That's probably what cost him from being in the top 4. And Oily Paul, or Paul Curtis, you might know him as. My partner Shannon and I have been calling him Oily Paul the last couple of weeks. Just watching him on TV last week, he loves a bit of oil, and Chuck obviously reapplies at halftime. And he was looking oily again today. So when I refer to Oily Paul, I'm talking about Paul Curtis. He had 2 goals, had some fantastic moments, a couple of really good moments that I'll talk about, but consistency across the game probably cost him. But Again, it was a really hard day for forwards, and I think that's probably what Eddie Ford and Paul Curtis, that's why they missed out, because there was so little ball going forward for them to get involved, really. That their opportunities were few and far between. So that's who I thought were the best, 6 or 7 players. Certainly best on the ground had to be Bontempelli, 35 disposals, 6 marks, 4 tackles, 11 clearances, 7 inside 50s. And it wasn't one of those games where he was bursting away from the stoppage time and time again. He did a lot of his work in close. He didn't stand out necessarily as, oh my goodness, he's killed us. But he had 11 clearances. So I think that tells the story. A lot of his disposals came in tight and were allowing players around him to get in space. He certainly did find some space for himself as well, and was dangerous when he went forward. We were fortunate that he kicked 3 points. If he'd converted 1 or 2 of those, it's probably a different game, because the Bulldogs probably pull slightly too far away for us to be in touch. But yeah, he was clearly the best on the ground. You could make an argument that Liam Jones was also fantastic. He had 17 disposals, 10 marks, 9 intercepts, 7 spoils, and spent most of the day on Nick Larkey, who had 0 impact. So really, the second week in a row we've had the opposition number 1 defender really shut Larkey down, but I'll talk in a minute. I don't think it's entirely Nick's fault. Certainly some blame his, but not all. So they were the best 2 for the Dogs, I think, but Bontempelli, it'd be hard to go past him for best on ground. So in terms of the North Podium and where things stand when we accumulate those votes, it's getting a little tighter at the top. It's still Sheezel on top with 26, LDU second place 24, and Tristan Xerri closes that gap a little bit. He's on 22 in third place. So that top 3, they're not moving. But below that, there are a couple of movements. So in equal 4th is Tommy Powell and Charlie Comben on 10. And then below them, Wardlaw 9, Zurhaar 8. So some late or recent form from Zurhaar and Comben is pushing them up slightly. And Tristan Xerri is within a best on ground performance of being equal top on the podium. So yeah, good to see the top 3 getting a little bit close. That at least makes things interesting for us going into the end of the year, because we're not quite sure who's going to get there. Before we jump into our usual positives and negatives, I'll give my usual plug. Please share the podcast out with any North Melbourne fans you know. Help me get the word out there. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service. Leave me a rating or a review if you can, particularly on Apple and Spotify. It really helps other people see the podcast. And get involved with my social media accounts, primarily X and Instagram, but you can find me at other places as well, at Northpod Show. And if you would like to support the show in another way, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link. It's buymeacoffee.com/NorthpodShow. You can find that link in the show notes. And you can support the show just like Steve did, who bought me 3 coffees. Thank you, Steve. He said, the best North podcast out there. Always looking forward to listening to this every week. Please keep it going. And Steve, I will indeed keep it going. Thank you for your support. And I'll be sure to purchase some vanilla Coke as a result of your support. So thank you. All right, let's get into the negatives. And given it was a loss, there are a couple of big ones to talk about. I alluded earlier on to the contested game was a big area of concern. And I thought I'd just spend a little bit more time kind of drilling down into what really went on there. We found ourselves just giving far too many handballs under immense pressure and passing that pressure down the chain. We saw those really dangerous forward handballs to a stationary player and a lot of sideways balls that, we were handballing to someone who essentially had a Bulldogs player. They were wearing a Bulldogs player as a t-shirt already before the ball arrived. We saw this a bit earlier in the year, and the Dogs definitely created this as part of the way that they set up around the ball. It's not new for us. We've got ourselves into this situation, and I don't think it's by design. I don't think our strategy going into the game was let's over-handball it. I think it's more come about because of the pressure that the Bulldogs put us under, and they didn't allow us that time on the ball to assess the options properly and either deliver a kick or to give a handball to a player that is in space and has some time. Conversely, it's easy to see the difference in the game when the Dogs got a clearance. That clearance allowed them to find a player nearby in space or who had some time to figure it out. Their quick hands were just better, and their setup around the stoppage and spacing was a lot better to allow them to, release pressure on themselves and find space to make a good decision. And you can see that, I talked about we lost the clearance battle, but we won the contested footy. And that's a big reason why a lot of that contested possession stuff was really in tight, and we weren't able to convert those contested possessions to us having the ball in space, unfortunately. We tackled really well at the start of the game. Unfortunately, went unrewarded. I know that there'll be some people wanting me to really bag out the umpires here, and there certainly was what I would describe as some inconsistent umpiring in the first quarter. I think the free count was 7-1 the Dogs' way, but we know the free count doesn't need to be equal. I just think watching it play out, there were a couple of decisions that probably didn't go our way, which is disheartening, and we weren't rewarded for that pressure in the first quarter, and then I think probably our pressure waned a little bit after that. I would say our capacity to stick a tackle was a real challenge. I think looking at the comparison between us and the Dogs, when most times when they try to tackle someone, they stayed tackled and they weren't able to cleanly dispose of the ball, whereas we got broken through in tackles several times. A lot of the reason that we didn't get free kicks earlier on was because the Dogs had the chance to get a handball away, and so therefore we didn't get a holding the ball tackle. We did end up winning the count 59-55, but it's clear as day to me the pressure that was created by the Dogs through their tackling was a lot higher and a lot more intense than ours. So a lot of our tackles were not ones that meant that the Dogs weren't able to do what they wanted to do, is the best way that I could describe it there. So, yeah, I mean, the umpiring early in the game impacted that a little bit. I think we probably were deserving of a little bit more reward in the first quarter, particularly because that was front half pressure. That was Paul Curtis and Cam Zurhaar putting on some fantastic tackling, and for whatever reason, that didn't amount to anything for us. But as the game went on, I think it was clear to see that those more mature bodies of the Dogs had a bit more strength in their legs and through their core, and they were able to break some tackles that we weren't able to. So that's, I think, that's going to come with time for us. We know that so many of our players are young and developing bodies, and part of that means that you're going to find it harder to tackle and also harder to break through tackles. And we're also missing Georgie Wardlaw, who's probably one of our best tacklers and really strong through the hips, which is what you need to be in order to break tackles. So, yeah, just some feedback for us, really. I think we saw what our midfield in terms of strength could look like in the next couple of years when Sheezel and Wardlaw and Tommy Powell and Will Phil have had a couple more years to develop, and their bodies are looking more like LDU's was or is, despite the fact that he had a quiet game. I didn't list him in the negatives, but unfortunately for his 100th, he had a pretty quiet game by his standards. I think it was 17 disposals, and he tried his best, but he was part of a midfield that was just soundly beaten, really, by the Dogs, unfortunately. The second negative, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on, but Larky was just given no chance, and I think a big part of that was the slow ball movement, which played right into Liam Jones's strengths. It allowed Rory Lobb to intercept. There was just no quick, direct, effective ball to our forwards all night. And sure, Larky was manhandled a couple of times, and there was definitely a moment in the first quarter where he should have taken a mark, which would have given him a shot on goal. That did eventually end up resulting in a goal for us anyway, so we got away with it. But in general, our play gave him virtually no opportunities. And in large part, that was because we were just kicking it long down the line to a contest over and over and over again. And the few times that we didn't do that and we took it on, either because it was a loose ball turnover or because we found a player loose in the middle, we just had this uncanny way of turning it over in silly situations. It didn't seem to matter what we did. The Dogs always had spares behind the ball. Didn't matter how high they turned it over. Didn't matter how fast we moved it. If we were kicking it long to Lucky, there was 2, maybe 3 on him. And it was just the same situation all night. We'd get, if we were running sort of, 90 metres, 80 metres out from goal, we seemed to look up and have no good options to kick to. All those options we just weren't able to execute and hit them, and it was 5 metres to the side of them, and it resulted in a loose ball which piled on the pressure again, and the cycle restarts. So yeah, not our best night forward of centre in general. Weren't able to get in there. When we did, we were wasteful with our inside 50s, and I think What I would have liked to see is us go a bit faster and then get to 80 or 90 metres out and then look for those opportunities to lower the eyes. Because as soon as we got to that point, we tended to bomb it long just because it was almost like, oh, thank goodness I can kick this ball inside 50 and I'm not going to have to worry about this pressure anymore. That's the vibe it was, and we'd kick it high and long, and the Dogs' tall defenders would tend to clean up. There was a couple of those times where we were able to crumb it, like Zurhaar or Sheezel or Paul Curtis were able to hit the front of the pack and opportunistically snag a goal. But across most of the game, it was intercept marks, or the ball just did bounce the Dogs' way a lot. And I'm not saying that to be whingy about it. I think it's more a reflection of they were just in better positions and read the ball or read the contest a little better. Because so often in stoppages and in marking situations, it just seemed like the Dogs were in the right position. So, yeah, our forward half game wasn't on. We didn't come to play in that area, as Mick Malthouse would love me to say. And, Larky had a really bad game again, but I think a big part of that was his opportunities were few and far between and not what you'd want to see the tall forward receiving in terms of their opportunities. And the last one, I mean, this is just a reflection really on the mids here, but Wilfield was not able to have the defensive output that he's had the last 2 weeks. I don't think he had a bad defensive game. He certainly seemed to spend the most time on Treloar, but at times he was matched up on Bontempelli and Liberatore as well. But all three of them definitely had impacts on the game. I mean, Bontempelli was best on the ground. Treloar had 2 goals and 22 disposals. Libba had a goal and 25. And that's not all on Will, to be clear. I'm not saying that he's responsible for all 3 of those players, but more so that he wasn't able to limit any of them dramatically. Treloar probably was the one that he limited most, but he was able to go forward and kick 2 goals. So that's the challenge, I guess, if you've got Wilfield in the side. At the moment, we're looking for him to do defensive work. There was a fantastic article on the AFL website about the origins of him becoming a tagger and how that started in the VFL and has very quickly become an adjustment to AFL level. But when he only has 13 disposals, 1 clearance and 4 tackle, we're going to need more offensive output from him if he's not able to nullify one of the opposition's best mids. I'm sure he'll stay in the side next week. He's had 2 fantastic weeks, so it's not to say that this was a disgraceful performance, because it wasn't, but he'll certainly stay in the side next week when Wardlaw's out. But I guess when Wardlaw comes back in, there's going to be some decisions to make, because we're probably playing with 1 too many mids if Wardlaw's in. So whether that's Powell or Phillips or Liam Shields, who potentially makes way, one of those types, I'm not sure, in most games at least, is going to play. So, yeah, unfortunately, not his best game, Wilfield, not his worst either. But like I said, I think we just need a little bit more in one direction. Either he needs to be damaging more offensively, or he needs to be nullifying the opposition's midfielder a little better than he did today. But he has had two fantastic weeks. So, I'll still back him in. And what I will say about Will is I love him around the ground. He's one of the first players to support and, celebrate with other players. You can see those leadership qualities on show. And I know that people will say, well, if leadership's his best quality, that's a concern. I get that, but he's doing what he can. When it's not working out for him with the ball, he's trying to impact in other areas. So I'll still continue to back you in, Will. I really do want it to work out for him. Let's look at the positives. Couple to look through, because although it was a sloppy game overall, there was some fantastic highlights. Aiden Core had 2 fantastic ankle breakers. We've seen him do it last year a couple of times. He had 2 today. One of them in particular was a fantastic fake to kick. And sure, he had his lowlights too. He gave away an unfortunate free kick, although I'm fairly sure it was on Cody Waitman, and I certainly don't mind someone taking out Cody Waitman, because boy, do I not like the way that he plays the game. Anyway, I digress. Core had some fantastic highlights and some lowlights. Orley Paul's goal in the first quarter was fantastic. He snapped it from the wrong side. Yeah, and he loves that pocket. It's the same area of the ground, I think, or at least the same, relatively speaking, that he kicked that goal against Sydney last year. It was a fantastic snap, and that was just after he'd taken a mark in the lead-up and been involved in the scoring chain earlier on. So he had a fantastic highlight. Like I mentioned, Eddie Ford nearly took mark of the year, just dropped it, and sure, it may not have been mark of the year given we've had some fantastic marks already this year, but it would have been an absolute specky. There was some great contested marks from the likes of Xerri and Comben that I also mentioned. Bryn Teakle took a fantastic grab and gold inside 50. So there was some highlights, despite the fact there were plenty of clangers and plenty of footy that, doesn't necessarily make you excited about the future. There were highlights to go with that, and I think, that's the kind of thing that we need at the moment. We've got to spotlight or hope there's a bit more of that, because we have had our fair share of turnovers and lowlights, and I think we are due to witness some positives. So it was good to see, particularly as younger players, like Core is obviously not around for the long term, but Oily Paul Curtis and Tristan Xerri and Ford and Comben, potentially Teakle, they're all players that, could be long-term prospects for us. So we love to see them getting involved and putting themselves in the highlights. I think probably the biggest positive from the game was our defence collectively. And I think we're starting to see the fruits of playing this group with some consistency, giving them plenty of time to get to know each other defensively, because under extreme duress, plenty of inside 50s and plenty of ball coming their way, I thought collectively they were fantastic. Chom was obviously the standout. He was our best tall defender, our best defender. It was fantastic with his intercepting, but as a group, I thought they withstood many shots. Sure, the Dogs missed a couple that they could have got, which would have made the scoreboard look a little different, but I thought we were organised. We didn't allow any of the Dogs forwards to get off the chain. Waitman's 3 was the most, and a couple of them were cheap, let me tell you. Ugelhagen, Treloar and Norton kicked 2 each, so no one really dominated and went crazy. That would have been the concern coming into the game, that given they've got so many tools and tall defending is not necessarily a strength of ours, that one or two of them might, kick 6 or 7, but they weren't able to do that, and that was in large part due to the collective efficacy of the defence. They worked so well together. When the ball hit the ground, they knew where each other was to get a releasing handball, and then get that ball outside 50. Did it end up usually coming straight back in? Yes, but I think you could see that they, for the most part, understand each other now, and yeah, I think that a lot of that comes from the consistency of playing together for most of the year. Like I said before, Core had some undisciplined moments, but I thought, he for the most part played a solid defensive game. We did get beaten in the lead a few times, but that's going to happen when the ball's coming in so often. Dawson looked really good contesting and spoiling and had some quick hands up off the deck, gave us a chance to repel. Fisher didn't have a great game, but I thought Tucker came in the last quarter and played his role quite well when Fisher was subbed off. Archer gambled off Waitman a couple of times and made some fantastic plays. Was beaten a few times too, like that's going to happen, but I think he had a solid game. Not as good as last week or as flashy as last week, but like watching at the ground, you could see him come off Waitman a couple of times and really attack the footy and do some fantastic things. I can remember him taking a really good mark late in the game under pressure. So yeah, I think given how tall they were, we did a great job, and you can see that chemistry building. It's going to be interesting to see when Griffin Logue does come back. I don't know if that's going to be next week or in the next few weeks when the plan for that is, but it's going to be really interesting to see who he comes back in for. I could see it being for Aiden Core, but then we are very tall. It's probably more likely, or we probably want Logue playing a role similar to that of Chom. I'm certainly not saying that Chom's going to come out of the side for what it's worth, but I think that's the sort of size, mobility, and role that Logue was playing last year. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he comes back in and what that looks like. But looking ahead to next year, I definitely think that we're starting to get a defence that looks like it can compete. Luke McDonald was okay. I don't think he was bad, but probably not a positive today. Just some really good collective efficacy. from the defence this week. So fantastic to see that from them. And then it's a couple of quick ones here. I thought when the lead got out to 30 plus, I think it was 38 late in the third quarter. And there were moments there where it could have become a real blowout and we could have crumbled. And I think the North Melbourne from earlier in the year or from, the last couple of years that might have happened. The Dogs had ascendancy all day. And if they'd kicked straighter, they probably would have put us out of it a lot earlier. But, they didn't. And given that fact, I thought we really did a good job of keeping them honest late, making them finish the game. We did make a bit of a push and like I said, get to the 17-point final margin. But ultimately, we probably needed a goal or two to be closer to a genuine chance. But we didn't give up like we might have earlier in the year. I definitely couldn't knock the effort from most players all game. It was really a game where our execution lacked. We weren't able to hit those kicks or those handballs and find options that we have been able to in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So keeps us in relatively good form and relatively good spirits ahead of a potentially another winnable game against the Gold Coast next week. And that brings me to my other point. I think given that there was some pretty challenging umpiring decisions early, I thought we kept our heads up. We didn't seem to really lose the plot with the umpires, given some of those decisions were really, really challenging. And then I thought, to be honest, late on, we got a couple of cheap free kicks that led to a goal or two for us. So it did, the ledger balanced a little bit later on, but the way the game started, I thought, we did a great job of, not falling into that woe is me kind of routine and letting it all fall apart. So that was great to see. And again, probably a bit of a sign that the group is maturing a little bit. That'll do for the match review. I am going a little longer than I thought I would. I wasn't looking forward to this game review just because it wasn't a game that made me excited on the whole. Although, like I said, there were certainly parts that were exciting. In terms of any other news from the week, there are a couple of things. The VFL side, I'll just touch on briefly. That was a loss to Footscray, 63-97. After a good first half, we were soundly beaten in the second half. That was a wet game, given it was played on Saturday as well. So too bad for them. They didn't have a roof to play under like we did. And some pretty usual suspects. Zurhaar and Greenwood were the best mids. McKercher got involved. Slevo got involved. Griffin Logue got through again. And then there were some goals to players like Sellers and Cooper Harvey. So I guess nothing super surprising there. It's probably tough to see Zurhaar or Greenwood getting in at the moment. But McKercher, he's now played 2 in the VFL, so I would think that he's close to coming back. And Griffin Logue's similar. I don't know how. I'm not sure if he played the full game. So that's probably the issue for me is if he's not able to play a full game yet, or we're a bit reluctant to get him to play the full game, you'd still want him in the VFL, I would think. But the fact that he's gotten through another game is fantastic. But yeah, unfortunately a loss for the VFL side. The 2 piece of news, Charlie Comben signed on until the end of 2027, so a little contract extension there gives him another 3 years after this one. Which is super exciting. I'm pleased that we've locked him up, but I'm also pleased that we haven't given him, a contract through a 2030 because there's just no need. He's had some injury issues this year. It's been fantastic to see him seemingly put those behind him with his new role, but we do know that his body it's been problematic. So you don't want to give a player like that a really, really, really long-term contract, but he definitely deserves an extension. I think it's fantastic that we're able to sign him up for another 3 years based on the fact that he's having a fantastic season. He seems like a ripper bloke, really deserves it. So fantastic that we're able to lock him away and hopefully that kind of security allows him to play his best footy over the next couple of years. And then who knows, like maybe he does end up with another really long-term contract after that or towards the end of that contract. But for right now, I think this is a perfect contract for him. We've got to pay players, so there's no issues with potentially overpaying a couple. But yeah, this feels right with Chom, and it's good to have another young player signed up. The other contract news-ish was that LDU made some comments during the week in light of it being his 100th game. He made some comments that he did want to play for North Melbourne for his career. He wants to be a one-club player. That's his intentions. And I think we just have to remember that he has not signed yet. So it's great that he's saying that, but I also think that there's not a lot else that he can say. I guess he could be a little bit more generic and say, I'll just wait until the end of next season, I'll make my decision, because he's not out of contract until the end of next year. I think that's worth noting. He becomes a free agent then, and that's when, there's been all the talk that someone like St Kilda could offer him a massive contract and he could go elsewhere. And that is still true. I think it's fantastic that he's saying the right things. I would love it if we could sign him long-term to a big contract. There's no doubt that he's going to get paid a lot of money given his form this season. There will be sides that are more than happy to pay him more than $1 million a year, particularly given the fact that the salary cap is increasing next year. So yeah, there was some comments. I just think it's important that we temper our expectations, that we take what he said with a grain of salt, because he has not yet signed and there's still plenty of time for him to sign or not sign. And I think, he seems like a great bloke as well. He does remind me a little bit of Ben Cunnington in that he strikes me as a sort of dude that's happy to be a little bit off Broadway, play for a quieter club, potentially. I don't know if that's true or if I'm projecting that onto him because I want it to be true. But he certainly is saying all the right things and playing some fantastic footy. So hopefully we are able to secure LDU to a long-term contract before the end of next year, so that this talk and innuendo does stop as soon as possible. But I mean, that's the reality of modern day footy. I think we've got to get our heads around the fact that stuff like that's going to get reported on, and we can choose whether or not to be frustrated or annoyed or buy into it. That's going to do us for our review stuff. We'll just quickly look ahead to next week. It's the exact same game, time slot, location, all of it. We're playing Saturday, July 6th, 1:45 p.m. at Marvel Stadium, this time against the Suns, who I did think that we would be a chance, or we could be a chance to win this game, but then the Suns went ahead and beat the Pies. So they've found some form at the wrong time for us. Played a very similar game, actually, to what we did against the Pies, except they were able to steady the ship in the end and win the game after giving up a bit of a lead to the Pies. Wasn't a 54-point lead like we gave up, but very similar vibes. And, I mean, that's been Collingwood's MO the last 18 months or so, is to just lull a side into a false sense of security and then run them down late. But, yeah, unfortunately for us, the Suns have found some form. You'd think that Wilfield is probably going to go to either Matt Rowell or Noah Anderson, depending on whether or not they want that inside or outside player more so to be shut down, because Rowell certainly plays a little bit more inside, whereas Anderson's a bit more of an outside player. I do think it's harder to tag and to impact inside players because they tend to be getting the ball, in tight and in close and fast hands out, and it's really hard to put a stop to that, whereas you can follow around a player who likes to find on the outside if you can match them for speed and endurance. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we do there. We went with Adam Treloar for the most part this week, and it didn't really work, but I think it's easier to put the clamps on him than it is to put on the clamps of Bontempelli, for example, who's a really good inside and outside player. I just want to see us keeping up that positive form. We'll be without Wardlaw again after his concussion at training, but positive signs the last month or so. We've been competitive, and this is just the kind of vibes that I hope we can, finish off the year with, to be honest. We're getting to that point now where we're well past the midpoint. This was round 16, so we're going into round 17. The rounds just go so fast. It's funny how you feel like it's the start of the year, and then all of a sudden you're getting towards the end of the season. So yeah, I'm really hoping that we can continue this form against Gold Coast. We've got Sydney the week after, which, they're looking like a really hard team to beat, but then Fremantle beat them this weekend too. So you just never know. You've got to keep yourself in the game. That's the kind of belief and the kind of attitude that we've got to keep up, that we've got to give ourselves a chance. That, I think, is going to do it for the podcast this week. School holidays for those of you that aren't in the teaching world. So I'm going to enjoy a couple of weeks off relaxing from my other job. I'm going to head up to the Blue Mountains this week, actually. So I'll be back in time to review the next game. Don't you worry. There'll still be a podcast after the Gold Coast game, but I am going to have a bit of R&R in this midwinter cold storm we seem to be having at the moment. I hope you all have a fantastic week. and keep those spirits high. Keep representing North Melbourne. And I will speak to you all, after the Gold Coast game, probably Saturday or Sunday next weekend. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of Northpod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at Northpod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.